all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Welcome to Veterans Radio. I am Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today. We've got some great programs for you. I think you'll find very interesting. We always want to remind you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or by going to veteransradio.net, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.net. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Caroline Walsh. Caroline's a Coast Guard alum. She is a veteran not only of the Coast Guard, but went and did work with the CIA and is currently a PhD student at University of San Diego in the field of leadership. So we've got a lot of areas to talk about. Caroline, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Hi, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, this is going to be interesting. You wrote a book called Fairly Smooth Operator, My Life Occasionally at the Tip of the Spear, and it really brings up all kinds of important issues to talk about, and we're going to make sure we cover them all. But I want to set this up a little bit. You grew up in Ohio. You went to college at California State University and picked up your bachelor's in psychology. I think you played college soccer, if I read that right.
Yes.
And in 2009, like any good college student who graduated, you said, oh, crap, what do I do now? and you looked around and said, I'm not exactly sure what I'm educated to do with my psychology degree, but some friends of yours were talking about enlisting in the United States Coast Guard, and that sort of drew you into that path. Do I have the story right so far?
Yes, that's what happened.
And you didn't come from a military family. This was sort of an accidental enlistment because of friends and the economy, if you will, more than anything else.
Right. Yes, except for grandparents in that generation that all served in World War II. I didn't have any military family members.
So I think you've kind of viewed this, and maybe the couple of other girlfriends who joined up at the same time from California State University kind of viewed this as a transition to the work world, but it wouldn't be all that much because, we weren't, Coast Guard's not in war, and they don't do any of those kinds of things. So what was your image of the Coast Guard before you went in?
Before I went in, I felt like it was a pretty blank slate. I think my friends and I, we looked up like the Academy website, like the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, and saw things there, made a lot of assumptions that were not what it was like to come in the enlisted route. So at the time, I saw them as a service that was kind of spotted around the coast and focused on rescues, safety, so the environment. So all of that was interesting to me.
Yeah, I think there's a lesson learned here for people thinking about joining the service is to make sure you really have an understanding of what that particular service does and what you're getting into. Recruiters are known to maybe fib a little bit, but you were this fit, athletic surfer runner girl from California, and you thought, well, this is going to be a pretty straightforward assignment. I love the ocean and I love being on water. but it really wasn't, you didn't really have a lot of in-depth about what the assignments might be, I take it.
Right, the assignments and the culture too, just didn't have any like clear picture of what it might be like.
And I think everybody who goes into service during our time, we have the good, the bad, and the ugly. There are things we love doing, there are things we'll put up with doing, and things we really hate doing. And certainly in your book, Fairly Smooth Operator, you lay those out for the reader. Talk us through a little bit about sort of that initial basic training, and why did you go in as an enlisted versus trying to go the officer route?
Sure. So my friends and I, we looked at the officer route, and we saw the lengthy application period. We saw that, they only do interviews at certain times of the year, and we were graduating in May, and we were ready to go into something. We've been playing soccer, surfing, we didn't know what to do with ourselves on a break. So we're like, okay, we're going to enlist. We're going to learn about the Coast Guard. Then people will have more respect for us if we go into this officer position. So it seemed like a good step to understand more about the Coast Guard before we, committed to being managers in it.
And you had an interest, was it right from the beginning in terms of intelligence, going to school for that and having assignments on that, or did that evolve after you enlisted?
That was before, yeah. So I saw the intel billet, and I had studied psychology, and I thought, this would be a great way to apply, what I've learned in psychology and build those skills in the real world instead of, in the classroom.
Well, again, this is one of those things you read it, the recruiter tells you something, is it really going to work out that way? And we'll talk about that a little bit. But you ended up serving 5.5 years active duty and enlisted, and then went back and served a couple of years after going to officer candidate school and being in the reserves. But one of the bad parts of the enlisted period was how long it took you to get to the intel school. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. So I joined in 2009 and went to a small boat station. And in the Coast Guard, most of the time, the idea is you go to a station or you go on a ship, and you don't have a rate or a job for about 6 months so that you learn a little bit about the Coast Guard. I think it's also like a bit of a holding period while the schools open up. So that's the idea. However, the intel rate and then another rate, the marine science technician rate, which my friends are going into, had an incredibly long wait list for school. So there were a number of people during that time who, hit 3 or 4 years without having a job and, building up their career through whatever unit they were at. So they got qualified in everything they could, but they couldn't move up the ranks past E3. So it was an interesting time. I don't know if they still have that problem or if they've kind of, sped things up a little bit in the schoolhouse. That's how I ended up as a non-rate for a couple of years.
Yeah, it was like 3 years before you were able to get in there. And again, most folks who serve Army, Navy, what have you, would be basic and then move their way right to their A school. But because the Coast Guard's so small, those positions are pretty limited, and I think you run into that kind of problem. So that really was part of the bad part of this, but part of the ugly part of this was you ended up at a small boat station in Montauk that was pretty isolated, pretty small, and it had a very toxic work environment. That really was part of the ugly nature of this enlistment period. Tell us a little bit about how you got to Montauk and what the problems were.
I got to Montauk, after boot camp. I remember the first day, somebody picked me up. I took the train in, and I saw him pick me up from the train station, and he was on his way out of the unit. And I just remember he just warned me. He was just like, whatever you do, like in the winters, find something to do and don't get in trouble. And I was like, okay. So that was an interesting introduction, a lot of warnings there. And then in the first weekend, the chief had gotten relieved from the unit, as I'm coming in, this huge, investigation was going on with the lead person at the unit. So I walked right into that, and then just noticed that, it was just this toxicity, and because of the way people rotated out, kind of staggered. It never had like that clean slate to really be like, okay, we're going to do things differently. Like there was always this lingering, just really, ugliness more than, just egos, but really treating people really poorly.
Yeah, and one of the things that you sometimes learn leadership by what not to do, and you got a lot of what not to do in Montauk. How many Coasties were at this small boat station?
There were only about 20, 25. It was very small unit. And our leadership was across the sound. So the main unit, we couldn't even drive there. It was, like a boat ride away. So,
well, it really demonstrated sort of the isolation of this station and how once a team gets isolated, bad stuff can happen with nobody knowing, and that's kind of what you ran into, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Now, we're going to come back to that one, sort of those problems a little later on here, but I want to move on to at least hit some other highlights that maybe weren't, maybe in the good category, not necessarily in the bad, but certainly not in the ugly. You had two, I'll call them unusual assignments that from the outside people would look at and say, man, that's where you wanted to be. One of them was in Key West and one of them was off to Gitmo. Not sure anybody wants to be there. But Talk to us a little about those two assignments and what things you learned or didn't learn about serving in the Coast Guard and leadership at those assignments.
So the Key West position was a Joint Interagency Task Force South, which is a counter-drug task force that covers all of maritime operations that we're doing with the U.S. military and Coast Guard forces, basically all of the Caribbean, Pacific. So fascinating place to be topic-wise, and just learned a ton about all the other military services and their cultures and their people, because we were all on the watch floor together. Saying the wrong acronyms to each other, and had really great leadership that, kind of helped flatten out the hierarchy so we could really speak truth to power. And, I was doing intel at the time. So it was, if I had something I was, had assessed, and it was counter to what we were planning, I was allowed to bring it up and we could have a discussion and, kind of check our biases and really have like rich discussions on what we were doing and the best way forward. So it was a very interesting, like cross-cultural, in terms of the military services experience, and then like really, really great leadership.
Well, and it was, because it was cross-cultural, it's this team relationship that sounds like it was developing. Which a lot of life, a lot of work life is about working with teams of different stripes and types. And it sounded like in reading Fairly Smooth Operator by Caroline Walsh that that was occurring at Key West. Even I thought an interesting leadership approach by one of the guys there, I don't remember if he was a general, was, hey, I'm going out to Key West. Is a small area, a small town for anybody who doesn't know and never been down there, and it has an active bar life. He would tell you where he's going out, what bar he's attending, so that everybody could avoid him, or they could come see him, right? I mean, interesting way to make sure that both of those things could be done.
Yeah, it was hilarious and very smart to just be like, this is where I'm going to be. So if you're going to be sloppy drunk, don't be here because I don't want to see you. But if you want to come say hello and chat, out of uniform, like come by. Yeah, it was really great.
Yeah,
great little leadership thing.
It is. It is a clever approach. Unfortunately, there was also, this may have been your first run-in with military and veteran suicide, but I think there was also you lost a lieutenant during that particular billet, if I recall.
Yes, yeah, we lost a really great Navy lieutenant there. Yeah.
And talk to us a little bit about how you internalized that experience.
So he was just a really great person, really cared about his team, a lot of servant leadership, making sure we were good. But he was on his way out. His contract was up. He had been on submarines for a while. And he was in Key West, which is a little isolated. When you're leaving the military, it's hard to get interviews in general because you're trying to time your leaving with what, employers want. So that's really tricky, and it's even harder when you're isolated. He had been isolated, I think, from his family for a little bit. So, like, from my perspective, I just saw it as, really a struggle with that transition process. And, maybe there's other stuff going on as well. But the fact that it came up, as he was leaving, and he really wasn't able to communicate what he wanted to do or where he was going to live. I think because he was a smart guy, people trusted, like, oh, he'll figure it out. But if you asked him those questions, like, he didn't really have a plan or support system. So I became really passionate about the military transition process and helping people have a vision and support and a plan when they're getting out, so that they have, a little bit of a direction to go in and some hope.
And you found that, the way I was reading it is, you found that as, while a horrible situation, you also internalized a little bit about, like, I got to be thinking about my future. I have to not find myself in that same spot of being transitioning out and with nothing to do. Am I overreading that?
No, not overreading it. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I definitely care about it with my peers, and then also, put a lot of pressure on myself to figure out what's next. So that, like, hopelessness, couldn't come in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think too much we talk about veteran transition, and we talk about it in terms of after you get out transitioning, but you really have to be thinking about it before that point to have some purpose, direction, and maybe a better transition. And one of the things you were doing while in service, and certainly commendable, and more people should do this, is you did work on a master's degree from Penn State, I believe.
Yes. So, that was a good that came out of the Montauk unit, was that I enrolled in a master's program and had some time while I was there to start it and finish it once I was in Key West. Yep.
And you also had a odd tour, and again, anybody who's been in, you get some really weird assignments, like, what am I doing here? What's this about? And that's kind of how you felt. Tell us about the Gitmo assignment.
Oh, yeah, the Guantanamo Bay assignment. That was when I was an officer in the reserves. And so I was at a port security unit. So even though I had been an intel specialist and, was beginning the federal work in intel and foreign affairs, I was like an administrative officer. And it was great people. But this Gitmo assignment was a year-long deployment to Gitmo. I had just finished a very intense federal civilian training that was 6 months long, and so it kind of was like, wait, why am I going to Gitmo? This, I just had hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in me in the federal work, and now this military work is asking me to leave that behind and not put that into play. So for me, it was like a struggle. Just in where I was at. I had just left active duty. I was still trying to build myself up, and then I had this year-long deployment that nobody was, cutting me any slack or, kind of understanding the situation here. So, and then once we got to Gitmo, I mean, I found it to just not have a lot of purpose. I mean, I think the whole prisoner situation is just, if you watch the news, I mean, it just is never ending. Like, these trials just keep going and going and going. So that whole mindset also like leaked into our mission, I think, where it was just like, what are we doing here? Like, this is not like a great use of all of our skills and abilities.
Yeah, and a lot of what the Defense Department does leaves you shaking your head. But I think I also, one of the themes I got out of your reading your book, Fairly Smooth Operator, Caroline Walsh, was that not being given the big picture can be very eroding on morale. If the unit doesn't know why it's here or how it fits into a bigger picture, it just seems like, why are we doing this? And again, was that one of the themes you were getting across? Maybe it's a leadership theme of you got to pass along the big picture, even down to the enlisted folk.
Definitely, yeah. Part of leadership is, passing down the purpose, or helping create it for people, or co-creating it, between leadership and followership. So, yeah, I think that communication of what we're doing, why we're here, how this fits in, why is Coast Guard here, and why isn't Navy here when it's a Navy base? So all kinds of questions. If you leave those questions open, I'm going to ask myself and like feel hopeless. But you can answer some of those questions, like maybe I'll have a little more of an understanding.
Yeah, I think there's a real message there for no matter where you are in an organization to don't assume everybody down below gets the big picture, because they haven't been told enough. Now, you got out, you wanted to continue to work in the intel field. You took an assignment with the CIA for 3 years from 2017 to 2020. Tell us a little bit about that transition and the sort of nature or reward of the work.
Yeah, I really enjoyed my time the federal government. What can I say about it? Oh, I also worked a lot of counter drug stuff at the CIA. So I was a targeting analyst, and I felt really empowered there. I felt like leadership really wanted to hear what you were producing and gave you a lot of autonomy as well. So overall, it was a really, really nice experience, and I felt like very rewarding and felt very involved at that job.
Well, what was interesting too, and you're relating this, is that I guess maybe it's because of TV and movies, right? We think all these CIA agents are just stamped out of the same cookie cutter mold. Now, certainly that's more true probably in the military, but you found a different type of culture in the CIA.
Definitely. Yeah, there's still, a hierarchy, but, you're calling somebody who, would be your, I don't know, your leadership in the unit, they're calling you by your first name. You're on the first name basis with them. Very open door policies with a lot of the managers. So there's a level of, yes, you're the leader, but this is a small team. So like, let's really create like a nice, respectful relationship. At least that's what I found. That's not always everywhere, but I found that more available in that environment than I did in the military environment.
Yeah, and interesting as you kind of related that the ability to have different ideas and clash on them was really kind of encouraged by the CIA, because they're trying to get to looking at a problem from different angles, and it's okay to have different opinions.
Yeah, I think we just held a lot of respect for each other in the teams I was on. So if somebody came to you with a different opinion, it wasn't like, oh, like mine is better. It's like, oh, like let me hear from them, because I don't want to write this up and not hear about, some of the things that could go wrong with this idea. So I think there's just like although like the CIA can be seen as arrogant when we're working with other agencies.
Oh no! No!
And within, there's even some arrogance, but there's also in a lot of these teams, like a level of really strong respect for each other.
Well, I want to talk about two more good things that I pulled out of your book from time in the service, and then we'll turn to some of the ugly. And I've one of them I want you to talk about because I don't think anybody else really not many people have experienced this. Tell us about the Armed Services Arts Partnership. How, why you got into it, where it took you, that sort of thing.
Sure. So the Armed Service Arts Partnership, it's called ASAP for short. It's based in DC and Virginia Beach, and we just started a branch out in San Diego. So they put on free arts classes for veterans, family members, caretakers, everything from stand-up comedy, writing, drawing, storytelling. So I ran into them when I was just out in DC. I think I saw a flyer and then went to an open mic and then signed up for their stand-up comedy class. And that really propelled me into writing my book and just having a little bit more of the arts in my life, which has been great.
Well, it's a great service available, and I don't think enough people know about it. There is a website that if you hit it in your search engine, Armed Services Arts Partnership, it'll populate. It's a great website. And in some regards, Caroline Walsh, stand-up comedian, this is what you're a little bit known for. But I actually, in talking to Caroline, setting this up, I said, I don't want the glib comedian. I want the smart academic Caroline Walsh to talk to me. So anybody who's listening to this and goes, well, she's how can she be a comedian? She's much funnier than this. I'm kind of putting a damper on you, aren't I?
Oh my gosh, no, I can go in any direction. So yeah, this is great.
Well,
I promise the book has funny stuff in it.
It does. So. It does. I'm leaving a lot of content out intentionally. It's worth going and reading it. It's a quick, easy read. You'll enjoy it. I think everybody who's been in the service will catch themselves in certain circumstances. Oh yeah, I was there. Going out to the bar and drinking too much, too much partying and good times. The jackass officer on top of the pyramid here, making life miserable for no good reasons. Problems with things like equipment. So yeah, there's a lot of funny stories in here, and as I said, I'm putting a bit of a damper on it. I apologize for that, but I don't want to discourage people from reading it, Caroline. I would now want to talk to the serious subject, because you've written on this. You have a lot to say on this, not only in the book, but in some academic paperwork that you've published. One of the things that shocked and surprised you, I think, in the Coast Guard was how much harassment, sexual harassment, you ran into, particularly in the first duty station at Montauk, that very small, isolated, small boat station that we talked about earlier. When you went when you got out of college and went into the workforce, and in this instance, the workforce is the Coast Guard, what were your expectations in that area about how you were going to be treated? And talk to us about what you actually found when you got there.
Yeah, I mean, I think of course, no, there's, in general, just, women have, possibly some more challenges in the workplace or school or anything like that. But I think I really expected a team environment. I had been playing college soccer. We had a men's and women's team. So we had interaction with the men's team, and, there weren't issues, major issues. Growing up, I had a twin brother, and, so I think there's just a level of respect that I expected as I continued into the Coast Guard, and that just was not there. So I think that I don't think I had, high expectations, but I did expect, a team environment and mutual respect, and that just was completely lacking. So
And this is a problem the military has faced for a long time. And honestly, the Coast Guard the Coast Guard Academy was the first academy to admit women to their classes. I think it was 1976 or so, but they were the first academy to do that. You kind of shake your head and say, how does this stuff continue to go on? Some of it probably never changes. It's junior high meets frat school, frat house at college. But it was more than just obnoxious statements or bullying, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's definitely more. There's, manipulation and intimidation. When I was having the problems, there wasn't this media put on the issue, and it wasn't clear what the next steps would be, and it wasn't clear. It was, speaking up would have put my career on the line and my movement forward on the line. So, there's nobody to just talk through, like, well, what if I do come forward? What does that look like? So, it was really tough.
And there weren't female officers readily at hand in this situation, right?
Right. I mean, there weren't even senior enlisted women at the unit I was at. So, there's still a representation issue.
So, some of this seem to also be related to, hey, what's this college-educated, athletic-looking girl, in quotes, doing this for? Some resentment, maybe? Is that the right word?
I think that's accurate. I think I was in the first wave of people to enlist after college because of the U.S. economy at the time. So yeah, I think like a resentment that probably went deeper that I could handle. That sounds accurate.
The Department of Defense issues an annual report on sexual assault in the military. They just issued the 2021 report in September of 2022. That report states or estimates that 8.4% of active duty women and 1.5% of active duty men experience at least one incident of unwanted sexual contact in the year before the survey was conducted. Now, as a lawyer, when I read these kind of things, I start parsing words, because when you start telling me about sexual contact and you start defining words certain ways, I say, well, you're trying to exclude out a whole lot of harassment and activity that's going on by definition. This report, Caroline, says less than 10% of the women get sexually assaulted. I think your experience tells you it's a much higher percentage of women who get sexually harassed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that harassment, especially in the military, whether it's like slight words or attitudes towards women, or picking apart a woman but not picking apart a subordinate male equally. That's all part of harassment.
Yeah, so I really wonder whether or not we're underplaying this problem. As a military spouse, my wife went through 30-some years of this, and different groups of people seem to be a little more edged towards protecting their turf, harassing the women. And I think probably the maritime service that the Coast Guard's in fits into that category a bit, because Navy ships and submarines and even Coast Guard ships are really male bastions of work, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
You've written on this, talking about the need for the Coast Guard to prioritize structural frame over human resources frame in addressing sexual assault, harassment, and retaliation. Can you explain to our veteran radio listeners, Caroline, what the difference between those two are and how you think it would be helpful?
Sure. Yeah. So, like, looking at cultural change, there's a couple different frames you can look at things through, and most of the time it's beneficial if multiple frames are being addressed because that's how you're going to get like a broader cultural change. So the military is very good at the structural frame, which is policies, training, rules and regulations. So that's how they attempt to enforce things. And so that's the first thing they look at when they're making a cultural change. But kind of what the military is not so good at is it's referred to as the human resource frame, but it's more like human relationships frame. So it's kind of like, okay, well, what conversations are we facilitating to, improve understandings, and how else besides just changing rules are we helping people like change and understand these changes? And so historically, yeah, the military is not as good at that, but it tends to also be needed when you really want to change the whole culture. You have to hit it from these different angles.
Well, you wrote on a Rand Corporation report from 2019 that found women leave the Coast Guard earlier than their male counterparts because of poor leadership, gender bias, discrimination, sexual harassment, and assault. It really is to avoid that attrition. After all these people have been trained up and invested in, you really have to try to stop this poor, misguided activity. And the Rand Corporation says that human-centered solutions would be better than structural. Are there a couple that if you were a Coast Guard commandant for a day, what would you be instituting for this HR-centered problem solving that they're not doing currently?
So some of the research I'm looking into is on ethical leadership. And so the ethical leadership, so there's all these different leadership styles and theories, like charismatic, authentic, and ethical really focuses on the two-way communication between the leaders and followers. And so instead of this top-down, which, a lot of military leadership is top-down, but at what points and what areas can you incorporate this two-way leadership so that leaders are also being informed of issues and problems, and then, communicating back down, like what they can do about it. So it's kind of about like that communication can then create a relationship that can create respect and like deeper conversations. But it kind of starts with accepting that, yes, the leaders are in charge and they're responsible, and, in this hierarchy, they're very important. But what can be done to create a little bit of a two-way when appropriate, so that you can have these harder conversations and you can like facilitate, different understandings. So that's what I would do is, look at that ethical leadership and those behaviors and how to bring those about and have conversations with the leaders about, what do you think about ethical leadership? What problems do you see with incorporating this? So also not just like pushing down things, but like getting feedback even about like the changes I would like, ideally to make.
Well, it really needs to be addressed. I'm glad somebody like you is looking at this and writing on this and has personal experience to help expand the dialogue. We're talking to Caroline Walsh, author of Fairly Smooth Operator, My Life Occasionally at the Tip of the Spear. She's a Coast Guard veteran, and she spent a couple of years doing intel with the CIA and is now in her PhD studies at University of San Diego in leadership. Caroline, when you get done with your PhD and you are going back into the real world, what would you like to do with that degree?
I really love, I love doing the research and consulting and having conversations and helping people, change either teams or organizations and just like create better environments so that people can accomplish their mission, whether it's, military or business. So, definitely going to keep up with stand-up comedy on the side. But, really passionate about the leadership research and like creating good teamwork and good environments.
Well, we want to thank you for spending some extra time with Veterans Radio today, not only to talk about the book and your experiences in the Coast Guard, but also to talk about this important issue. And we wish you nothing but the best as you finish up your degree program.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking to me. This has been so nice.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by going to veteransradio.net. And until next time, you are dismissed.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org, VA Ann Arbor Health Care System, the Vietnam Veterans of America Charles S. Kettles Chapter, Ann Arbor, Michigan, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423 in Ann Arbor, and the American Legion Press Corn Post 46, also in Ann Arbor. We appreciate all your support. You can go to veteransradio.net, click on the sponsor level, and continue to support keeping Veterans Radio on the air. And until next time, you are dismissed.
Spring, is that you? Warmer temps mean new Allbirds styles. Meet the new Superlight collection, the lightest ever shoes from Allbirds, now in fresh colors. These must-have travel shoes have a lighter-than-air feel and barely-there fit that made them the most packable shoes ever. Plus, they're comfy right out of the box. That means more comfort and less baggage. Experience how Allbirds is redefining comfort. Visit allbirds.com and use code SUPER24 for a free pair of socks with a purchase of $48 or more. That's ALLBIRDS.com, code SUPER24.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.